y'all, Miss Mayhew here, and I'm going to go over the structure of the mitochondria with y'all. So what you have here is a diagram that looks super similar to the one that you can find in your notebook. There are also a bunch of lines pointing to the different important parts of the mitochondria that we're going to go through really quickly together. This first line at the top right here is pointing at the outer membrane of the mitochondria. The second line here is pointing at the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Remember, the mitochondria is an endosymbiont, and the fact that it has these two separate membranes is part of the evidence that supports the endosymbiotic theory. Now, the space that is in between the outer membrane and the inner membrane, we call that the inner membrane space. Now, this inner membrane has a bunch of folds in it. We call those folds cristae. Now, the space on the inside of the mitochondria, that space within the inner membrane, we call that the matrix. Now, the prompt on this quad also asks you to predict what type of molecules will move across the membranes. So, to start with our prediction, let's just start with the basics of cellular respiration that you learned way back when in freshman biology. That is the basic formula for cellular respiration, which is glucose plus oxygen turns into carbon dioxide and water. Our reactants are going to go into the mitochondria. This is where a lot of these reactions take place. So our glucose starts out in the cytosol, where we have glycolysis, which takes place. Remember, that's where our glucose is broken down into pyruvate. Now that pyruvate is what's able to move through these protein channels and allows that pyruvate to move into the matrix. Once that pyruvate is in the matrix, that is when it is oxidized and we have acetyl-CoA, and this is also where we have the Krebs cycle taking place. Now, in the Krebs cycle, this is where we're producing a lot of the carbon dioxide. So this is where the carbon dioxide that's released from that freshman level statement comes from. Now, because carbon dioxide can diffuse across membrane, it moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So as it's being made in the matrix, that's going to increase the concentration in the matrix. So naturally, the carbon dioxide is going to want to diffuse out of the mitochondria to where there's a lower concentration of carbon dioxide. Now, embedded in the inner membrane, you have a series of proteins that make up the electron transport chain. Now, the electron transport chain, in relation to the super basic freshman biology equation, this is where we take the oxygen. So, as oxygen is being used up in that inner membrane and in that matrix, then it's going to want to diffuse in where it's getting used up. Remember, if it's getting used up, that means it has a lower concentration. So oxygen is going to be diffusing into the mitochondria from where there's a higher concentration to where there's a lower concentration, which is in the matrix. Now, that oxygen is used by the electron transport chain to act as an electron acceptor. When this happens, this oxygen takes those electrons from the electron transport chain. It combines with some hydrogen protons, which gives us water. So now water is being created, meaning we have a higher concentration of water. So the water is going to diffuse out of the mitochondria from where there's a lot of water, where it's being created, to where there's a lower water concentration on the outside of the mitochondria. The electron transport chain also synthesizes ATP. So again, following the laws of diffusion, where the ATP is being synthesized, that is going to increase the concentration of ATP on the inside of the mitochondria. So the ATP is going to move from where there's a higher concentration, where it's being synthesized, to where there's a lower concentration, which is outside of the mitochondria, where it's oftentimes being used for a whole plethora of other reactions happening in the cell.